The desert did not care that it was Christmas Eve. It lay flat and indifferent beneath the night sky, a blackened sea of stone and dust stretching beyond the perimeter lights of Forward Operating Base Redstone. Wind moved across the tarmac in thin, slicing currents, carrying the smell of aviation fuel, burned metal, and something older, sand that had known empires before uniforms. Inside the operations building, Christmas existed only as a date stamped on the top right corner of classified documents. December 24th, 23:01 hours, Lieutenant Evelyn Evie Cross stood with her hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the live drone feed projected against the far wall. She did not blink. She rarely did when something mattered. On the screen, 12 human heat signatures pulsed faintly in white against a darker mass of rock and scrub. They were pinned, no movement for 4 minutes now, 12 Navy SEALs, her people. Around her, the command center hummed with restrained urgency, keyboards clicking, radios murmuring, the distant whine of generators outside the reinforced walls. Coffee cups sat forgotten. Someone had draped a strand of red plastic tinsel over a monitor earlier in the evening. No one had commented on it. Evie Cross was 29 years old, an Air Force Special Warfare officer assigned as Joint Tactical Air Control, JTAC, liaison to the task force. She had been in theater long enough to recognize the sound of a mission sliding off the rails. The SEAL element, call sign Valkyrie 2, had been inserted just after dusk to extract a high-value target from a cave complex 30 kilometers east. Intelligence had been thin, too thin. Weather worse than forecast. Enemy presence underestimated. By 22:17, the exfil LZ was compromised. By 22:40, air support was grounded due to a temporary airspace conflict that no one could adequately explain. By 2300, Valkyrie 2 was pinned down in a ravine with dwindling ammo and no birds inbound. Evie shifted her weight slightly. She had learned early in her career that movement invited attention, and attention invited interruption. Across the room, Colonel Harold Pierce stood with his arms folded, jaw clenched. He was a career officer, politically precise, operationally cautious, and deeply invested in the appearance of control. He had arrived at Redstone 6 weeks earlier and had made it clear that he did not appreciate aggressive improvisation, especially not from junior officers, especially not from women. "Repeat," Pierce said flatly. "Airspace is closed. CENTCOM directive. We hold." The words hung in the air like frost. Evie felt them land in her chest, cold and heavy. "Sir," she said, her voice measured, professional. "With respect, Valkyrie 2 does not have the luxury of holding. They are taking intermittent fire from elevated positions. Thermal shows maneuver elements closing from the east." Pierce did not look at her. "Lieutenant, you've made your recommendation. It's noted." Noted. That word had buried men before. Evie glanced back to the screen. One of the heat signatures flickered, then dimmed. "Contact," a voice crackled over the speaker. It was strained, breathy, held together by discipline and pain. "Redstone. This is Valkyrie 2 actual. We are black on options. Repeat, black on options." A pause, static, then quieter, almost as if the man had turned his head away from the mic. "Tell my guys. Merry Christmas." Evie felt her jaw tighten. She had trained with SEALs before, jumped with them, planned with them, watched them operate with a level of calm violence that bordered on surgical grace. They were not men who dramatized. If they were saying goodbye, it meant the math had turned fatal. She stepped forward. "Sir," she said again, louder now, "authorize immediate hot extract via Corridor Delta. I can vector rotary at treetop level. Risk is acceptable given ground truth." Pierce finally turned. His eyes were sharp, irritated. "You are asking me to violate an airspace restriction issued 45 minutes ago, based on satellite intelligence you cannot personally verify." "Yes, sir. And if that restriction exists for a reason, then 12 Americans die following orders that no longer reflect reality." Silence. In that silence lived careers, promotions, court-martials. Pierce exhaled slowly. Denied. The words struck like a slap. Evie did not respond immediately. She looked at the screen again. The heat signatures were tighter now, closer together. A defensive circle. 12 lives collapsing inward. Something shifted in her. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It was the same thing that had carried her through selection, through nights when quitting would have been easier than continuing. A quiet internal alignment between what was right and what was required. She keyed her headset. Valkyrie 2 actual, she said, steady. This is Redstone JTAC. Sit tight. I'm working it. A pause. Then, copy Redstone. We'll hold as long as we can. Evie reached down and switched channels, one not assigned to her station, one she technically did not have authority to use. Pierce noticed. What are you doing, Lieutenant? She did not look at him. Saving 12 men. You are out of line. Yes, sir. The drone feed flickered as incoming fire lit the ravine. The heat signatures scattered, then regrouped. Evie spoke quickly now, voice clipped, professional, lethal in its calm. Razor 1, this is Cross. Spin up. You're cleared hot. I'll paint the corridor. A beat, then disbelief. Lieutenant, we're grounded. Negative. You are not. Follow my vector. 90 seconds. In and out. Pierce stepped toward her, anger flashing. Lieutenant Cross, stand down. That is a direct. She turned to face him. Her eyes were steady. Sir, if I am wrong, I will accept full responsibility. Strip my rank. Court-martial me. End my career tonight. She paused. But if I am right, they live. The room had gone completely still. Outside, somewhere beyond the blast walls, a helicopter engine began to whine. Pierce stared at her, the weight of command pressing visibly into his shoulders. For the first time since she had met him, he looked unsure. Evie turned back to the screen. Razor 1, she said. Clock is ticking. The helicopter lifted off. 90 seconds had begun, and Christmas Eve would never be the same. The helicopter rose into the night like a held breath finally released. From the flight line, Razor 1 lifted without ceremony. No festive music, no farewell waves. Just the thump of rotors cutting through cold desert air and the red anti-collision lights blinking against darkness. The pilots did not ask further questions. They had heard Lieutenant Cross's voice before. They knew what that tone meant. Inside the operations center, every eye followed the drone feed. Evie Cross stood absolutely still, one hand resting lightly on the console as if grounding herself. Her headset hummed with overlapping frequencies now, aircrew chatter, ground force updates, base control protests. She filtered them instinctively, isolating only what mattered. Time compressed. 90 seconds was not a number. It was a battlefield. Razor 1, descend to 15 feet AGL, Evie said. Stay masked by terrain. You'll see the ravine open up at my mark. Copy. The pilot replied. His voice was calm, but Evie heard the tension beneath it. We're riding the deck. Colonel Pierce stood behind her now, rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. He had not ordered the helicopter to land. He had not ordered it to abort. He was frozen between command authority and irreversible consequence. This was no longer theoretical. Lieutenant, he said quietly, dangerously, you are operating without authorization. Evie did not turn. Sir, with respect, she replied. Authorization stopped being relevant when the ground truth changed. The drone feed zoomed in as Evie adjusted the camera angle. The ravine came into sharper relief, jagged rock walls, sparse scrub, the faint flashes of muzzle fire winking like dying stars. Enemy movement was clearer now, 3 clusters advancing in staggered formation. They were closing. Valkyrie 2, Evie said. Pop smoke on my mark, white, hold until bird is overhead. A pause. Then, through gunfire, Roger, we're ready. Evie watched the clock on the screen tick down. 47. Razor 1, you're 30 seconds out, she said. Expect hot LZ. I'll clear fires. Understood. The airspace warning still blinked red on the command console. Somewhere, an unseen bureaucratic boundary was being violated, one drawn far from the ravine, far from the men bleeding into the sand. Evie felt a flicker of something then, not fear, but clarity. This was why she had stayed. She had joined the military believing in structure, in order, in the idea that good systems produced good outcomes. Over time, she had learned a harder truth. Systems were only as moral as the people willing to challenge them when they failed. Mark, she said. On the screen, 12 small plumes of white smoke bloomed in the ravine, immediately torn at by wind. Visual, Razor 1 confirmed. We see it. The helicopter dipped lower, skimming rock outcroppings so close the rotors seemed to shave stone. Tracer fire arced upward, red lines clawing at the dark. "Taking fire," the pilot said. "Heavy. Keep moving," Evie replied. "You're almost there." Colonel Pierce leaned forward despite himself. "God help them," someone whispered. The ravine erupted as Razor 1 flared hard, rotors screaming. The downwash kicked up sand and debris, obscuring the drone's view for a split second that felt like an eternity. Then shapes emerged, figures running, stumbling, half carrying one another toward the open ramp. "Go, go, go!" a SEAL's voice shouted over the feed. Evie's hand tightened on the console. "Count them," she murmured. 1, 2, 3. A fourth man stumbled, caught by another, and dragged forward. Gunfire intensified. Enemy forces were closer now. Too close. "Razor 1, you're compromised," Evie said. "Load and lift. Load and lift." Still boarding. A body fell just short of the ramp. Another SEAL dropped beside him, hauling him up with a strength born of something beyond adrenaline. "Move!" someone screamed. 12. "Lieutenant," Pierce said, his voice breaking through the din. "Call it. Call it now." Evie did not respond. She counted. 9. 10.11. The last heat signature flickered wildly, then surged toward the helicopter. A hand slapped the ramp. A body rolled inside. 12, Evie said sharply. "All accounted! Razor 1 lifting!" the pilot shouted. The helicopter surged upward, just as a rocket-propelled grenade streaked through the space it had occupied seconds earlier, detonating against the ravine wall in a shower of fire and rock. The drone feed shook violently, then steadied. Razor 1 climbed hard, banking away into darkness. Inside the operations center, no one spoke. The only sound was Evie's breathing, slow and controlled, as the tension drained from her muscles all at once, leaving behind a hollow ache. On the screen, the ravine burned quietly. 12 heat signatures now pulsed inside the helicopter, alive. Someone exhaled shakily. Another person sat down hard in their chair. Colonel Pierce closed his eyes. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the radio crackled. "Redstone," came a hoarse voice. "This is Valkyrie 2 actual. Static." Then, softer. "They told us to hold. They told us no one was coming." A pause. "But you came," Evie swallowed. "You did the hard part," she replied. "We just kept a promise." The channel went quiet. Pierce turned slowly toward her. "You realize," he said carefully, "that what you just did will not disappear. There will be inquiries, investigations." "Yes, sir." "You defied a direct order." "Yes, sir." "You put aircraft and crew at extreme risk." "Yes, sir." He studied her face, searching for hesitation. Finding none. "And if it had gone wrong?" Evie met his gaze. "Then I would have lived with that." "So would you." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Pierce looked away. Outside, Razor 1 crossed the perimeter and descended toward the medical pad. Floodlights snapped on, illuminating the helicopter as it touched down. Medics ran forward, silhouetted against the spinning rotors. Christmas Eve had crossed midnight. December 25th had begun with blood on the sand, and 12 lives still breathing. Evie removed her headset and set it carefully on the console. Her hands were steady, but inside, something had fractured, and something else had been forged, because saving them was only the beginning. What came next would decide whether the truth survived. Dawn came late to forward operating base Redstone, not because of clouds or weather, but because no one noticed the sky changing color. The medical pad was still lit like a crime scene when the sun finally pushed a thin line of gray over the horizon. Blood-streaked boots marked the concrete. Empty IV bags fluttered in the rotor wash as medics moved with quiet efficiency between stretchers. 12 men lay under thermal blankets, alive, some unconscious, some shaking. One gripping a rosary so tightly the beads had cut into his palm. Another staring at the sky with the hollow disbelief of someone who had already accepted death and been denied it. Lieutenant Evie Cross stood just outside the perimeter, hands in the pockets of her flight jacket, watching without intruding. She had not slept. Adrenaline had carried her through the landing, through the debrief that followed, through the first wave of congratulations whispered like contraband. But now, in the cold light of early morning, the cost of the night settled into her bones. Behind her, boots crunched on gravel. "You should be inside," said a voice. She did not turn. She knew it. "Morning, sir." Colonel Pierce joined her, his uniform immaculate despite the long night. His face looked older, not tired, older, as if something had aged him rapidly in the span of a few hours. "They're stable," he said. "Too critical, but stable." "That's good." A pause. "You realize," Pierce continued, "that by this time tomorrow, this base will be crawling with investigators." "Yes, sir. Airspace logs have already flagged the incursion. CENTCOM wants explanations." Evie nodded once. Pierce studied her profile, the set of her jaw, the calm stillness. She looked exactly like she had in the operations center, except now the stakes were no longer abstract. "Why?" he asked quietly. Evie turned to face him. "Why what, sir?" "Why risk everything?" he said. "Your career, your future. For 12 men you barely know." Evie considered the question carefully, not because she did not know the answer, but because it deserved precision. "Because they were told no one was coming," she said, "and because they were wrong." Pierce absorbed that. "You understand how this will be framed," he said. "Unauthorized action, breakdown of command discipline, emotional decision-making." "Sir," Evie replied evenly, "with respect, discipline without moral judgment is not discipline, it's compliance." Pierce did not argue. Instead, he looked back toward the med pad where a medic adjusted an IV line on one of the SEALs. "They trusted you," he said finally. "That's not nothing." "No, sir." Pierce exhaled and straightened. "You are relieved of duty pending review," he said. "Effective immediately." Evie nodded. "Yes, sir." She had expected it. "You will surrender your credentials and remain on base." "Yes, sir." He hesitated, then added, "This is not a punishment, it's procedure." "I understand." Pierce studied her for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. Evie remained where she was. As the colonel disappeared around the corner of the building, a man approached from the med pad. He moved stiffly, favoring his left leg, but his posture was unmistakable, quiet confidence wrapped in fatigue. A Navy SEAL commander. He stopped a few feet from Evie and removed his helmet, revealing a face lined with dust and exhaustion. A bandage ran along his temple. "Lieutenant Cross," he said. "Yes, sir. I'm Commander Nate Holloway," he said. "Valkyrie 2 actual." She nodded. "I know." He studied her for a long moment, as if committing her face to memory. "They told us air was scrubbed," Holloway said. "Told us command had bigger priorities." Evie said nothing. "We were preparing to split up," he continued. "Make it harder for them to take us all." He paused, swallowing. Then your voice came over the radio. Evie felt something tighten in her chest. Holloway extended his hand. His grip was firm despite the tremor in his fingers. "You didn't have to come," he said. "But you did." Evie met his eyes. "That's the job." He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "That's the calling." He released her hand and stepped back. "If they come for you," Holloway added, "they'll have to come through us." Evie gave a small, restrained nod. "Thank you, sir." He turned and walked back toward the med pad, limping slightly, but standing tall. The sun climbed higher. By mid-morning, the base had shifted into a different kind of tension, the brittle, formal strain of after-action accountability. Evie sat alone in a small office, her credentials surrendered, her phone confiscated. A single American flag hung on the wall. The hum of air conditioning filled the silence. A camera had been mounted in the corner. She waited. At 10:30, the door opened. 2 men entered, both in civilian clothes. One carried a folder thick with documents. The other carried nothing at all. "Lieutenant Evelyn Cross," the first said. "I'm Mr. David Langley, Department of Defense Inspector General. This is Mr. Robert Hale." Hale's eyes were cold, assessing. "Do you understand why you're here?" Langley asked. "Yes, sir." "Good," Langley said. "Then let's begin." The questions came methodically. Timeline, authorization, communications, deviations from protocol. Evie answered calmly, precisely. She did not embellish. She did not deflect. "Yes, I authorized the aircraft. Yes, I violated restricted airspace. Yes, I understood the consequences. Hale leaned forward. And yet you proceeded. Yes. Why? Evie looked him directly in the eye. Because the order to stand down was wrong. Hale's lips tightened. Wrong according to whom? According to reality, Evie replied. According to the men on the ground. According to the principles we claim to serve. Silence stretched. Langley closed his folder slowly. You are aware, he said, that there were intelligence concerns regarding that airspace. Yes, sir. Concerns serious enough to halt all rotary operations. Yes, sir. And yet those concerns were not communicated to the team being asked to die under them. Hale shifted in his seat. Langley studied Evie with new interest. Lieutenant, he said carefully, do you believe someone knowingly accepted the loss of Valkyrie 2? Evie did not answer immediately. She thought of the blinking red warning, the vague explanations, the delay. I believe, she said slowly, that the risk was calculated from a distance that made the lives involved easier to discount. Hale scoffed. That's a serious accusation. Yes, Evie said. So is 12 body bags on Christmas morning. The room went very quiet. Langley closed his folder completely. This is no longer a question of procedure, he said. It's a question of truth. He stood. We'll be in touch, Lieutenant. The men left. Evie remained seated, staring at the flag on the wall. She had crossed a line. Now the line would answer back. By nightfall, forward operating base Redstone felt smaller. Not physically, its perimeter lights still stretched wide across the desert, but emotionally, as if invisible walls had moved inward. Conversations lowered. Doors closed more softly. Rank insignia seemed heavier, more deliberate. Word had spread. Lieutenant Cross was under investigation. Some said she was finished. Others said she would be quietly reassigned, the incident buried under classified redactions. A few said nothing at all, which was louder than any opinion. Evie spent the evening in her quarters, seated on the edge of her bunk, hands resting on her knees. The room was bare by regulation. Bed, desk, locker, flag folded precisely on the shelf. She had been ordered not to leave the building. At 1900, a knock came. She opened the door to find Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes standing in the hallway. His uniform was worn, his posture relaxed but unmistakably authoritative. He had the look of a man who had survived long enough to stop proving anything. "Lieutenant," he said, "hope I'm not intruding." "No, Master Chief," Evie replied. "Please." He stepped inside, glancing around the room with mild amusement. "Spartan," he said. "Figures." She closed the door. Reyes did not sit. Instead, he leaned against the desk, folding his arms. "I'm not here officially," he said. "No paperwork, no statements. I understand. I served with Holloway before he picked up command," Reyes continued. "Good officer, better man." Evie nodded. "He told me you didn't hesitate," Reyes said. "That when it mattered, you moved." Evie met his gaze. "Yes, Master Chief." Reyes studied her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and produced a small object, a silver seal trident, scuffed and worn. "He asked me to give you this," Reyes said. Evie stared at it. "I can't accept that," she said quietly. "You're not," Reyes replied. "You're holding it." He placed the trident gently on the desk. "It's not a decoration," he continued. "It's a marker, means someone showed up when they didn't have to." Evie felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," she said. Reyes nodded. "They're circling wagons upstairs," he added. "Some folks don't like how close this came to daylight, I figured." "But there's a problem," Reyes said, a faint smile touching his mouth. "You saved 12 operators, and operators talk." He straightened. "Sleep when you can, Lieutenant. Tomorrow's going to be loud." He left without another word. Evie sat down slowly and looked at the trident. She did not touch it. The following morning began with a summons. Evie was escorted to the main conference room, a space usually reserved for high-level briefings. The long table was already occupied. Colonel Pierce at the far end, flanked by officers Evie did not recognize. Civilian analysts, legal counsel, representatives from higher command. At the head of the table sat Brigadier General Thomas Avery. Avery was known across the theater as a clean hands commander, meticulous, controlled, and deeply invested in institutional reputation. He did not waste words. "Lieutenant Cross, Avery said. Take a seat. Evie complied. This inquiry is not about heroism, Avery continued. It is about command integrity. Yes, sir. You violated restricted airspace and disregarded a direct order. Yes, sir. Avery steepled his fingers. Why should this not end your career? The room waited. Evie took a breath. Because the order was based on incomplete and outdated intelligence, she said. And because adhering to it would have resulted in 12 preventable deaths. A murmur rippled down the table. Avery raised a hand. Intelligence determined there was a high probability of hostile air defense assets in that corridor, he said. With respect, sir, Evie replied. That assessment was over an hour old. Real-time ISR showed no such assets active. A civilian analyst shifted uncomfortably. Avery's gaze sharpened. You are implying, he said, that command knowingly withheld updated intelligence. I am stating, Evie said carefully, that updated intelligence was available but not acted upon in time. Silence. Colonel Pierce cleared his throat. Sir, he said, I would like to add that Lieutenant Cross presented a viable option under extreme time constraints. I denied it. All eyes turned to him. I denied it, Pierce repeated, his voice steady. And I was wrong. The admission landed like a dropped weight. Avery looked at Pierce, surprised. Pierce met his gaze without flinching. I allowed procedural caution to override ground truth, Pierce said. The responsibility is mine. Avery leaned back. This is not a courtroom, he said. This is a command review. Understood, sir, Pierce replied. But command includes accountability. Avery's expression softened slightly. Lieutenant Cross, he said, returning his attention to Evie, do you believe you are above the chain of command? No, sir, she replied. I believe I am accountable to it. Then why break it? Because the chain exists to support the mission, Evie said. Not replace judgment when judgment is required. The general was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he stood. Dismissed, he said. All of you. The room emptied slowly. Evie remained seated, unsure whether she was to stay. Avery gestured for her to remain. When they were alone, he spoke more softly. You understand, he said, that institutions fear precedent. Yes, sir. And yet, Avery continued, they fear scandal more. He regarded her with a measuring look. 12 SEALs are alive because you acted, he said. Their after-action reports are unequivocal. He paused. This will not be publicized, he said, but it will be resolved. Evie's pulse quickened. Your record will reflect an administrative reprimand, Avery said. Quiet, non-career ending. She nodded. And, he added, you will be reassigned. Evie looked up. To where, sir? Avery allowed himself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. To a place where judgment under pressure is not discouraged. He extended his hand. Evie stood and shook it. As she left the room, she felt neither triumph nor relief, only something steadier. The line had bent, but it had not broken. Christmas passed quietly at Forward Operating Base Redstone. There were no ceremonies, no speeches about sacrifice. The decorations were taken down without comment. The base returned to routine, as if routine itself could absorb what had happened. But among 12 men, routine would never be the same. Evie Cross left Redstone 3 days later. Her transfer orders were concise, no explanation beyond operational reassignment. She packed the few belongings she had arrived with and one she had not. The worn seal trident, wrapped carefully in a cloth and tucked into her bag. She did not consider it a trophy. She considered it a responsibility. The transport aircraft lifted at dawn, banking east as the desert fell away beneath it. Evie watched the horizon until it disappeared. 6 weeks later, winter rain fell steadily on the eastern seaboard. Evie stood on the tarmac of a secure installation, her collar turned up against the cold. The facility did not bear a name, only a number, and its presence was marked more by absence than visibility. No flags, no signage, just concrete, steel, and silence. A man approached her, extending a hand. Lieutenant Cross, he said. Welcome. She shook it. Inside, the corridors were narrow and unadorned. The briefing room was small, the screen already lit with satellite imagery and live feeds. A dozen operators sat quietly, eyes sharp, posture relaxed. A commander addressed the room. "This unit exists for one reason," he said. "When systems fail and time runs out, judgment is all that's left." Evie took her seat. She did not smile. She listened. Months passed. The investigation faded into classified files. No headlines were written, no commendations announced. That was how the system preferred it. Clean, quiet, contained. But stories moved differently among those who carry rifles and radios. They traveled in half-remembered conversations, in nods exchanged at training sites, in the way someone's tone changed when they said her name. She didn't wait. She came anyway. She brought them home. Evie never corrected anyone. She never confirmed it either. On a cold spring morning, she stood on a quiet overlook near the Atlantic, the ocean gray and restless below. She had been granted a rare day off. She spent it alone. She took the trident from her pocket and turned it over in her hand. 12 names were etched on the back now, added by someone else, sometime after Redstone. She traced them with her thumb. She thought of the ravine, the smoke, the clock counting down. She thought of Colonel Pierce, standing in front of his superiors and choosing truth over self-preservation. She thought of Commander Holloway's voice over the radio, steady even when everything else was breaking. And she thought of the order she had disobeyed, not with regret, but with understanding. Because courage, she had learned, was not loud. It did not announce itself. It simply refused to look away when the moment demanded action. Evie closed her hand around the trident and slipped it back into her pocket. The wind off the ocean was sharp, clean. She breathed it in. Somewhere, 12 men were living ordinary lives again, laughing, struggling, remembering. Some of them would never know how close the night had come. Others would never forget. That was enough. Evie turned and walked back toward the road, her steps unhurried, her posture easy. She carried no medals. She carried no public recognition, but she carried something rarer. The knowledge that when the line between obedience and responsibility had appeared, she had chosen correctly. In every institution, there comes a moment when rules and reality collide. In that moment, character, not rank, decides the outcome. True courage is not the absence of fear or the rejection of discipline. It is the willingness to accept consequence in order to protect what truly matters. When systems fail, it is conscience that must hold the line.